preliminary matter, could I
Sure.
address the court? Your Honor, I am not asking you to revisit the decision you made in any way, but I need clarification because I'm not clear on something you said yesterday, and I need to get the clarification. And here's my question to the court to clarify. Are you saying that the law of this case that this case is following is that you as the fact finder or a jury as a fact finder is to determine what the reasonable officer standard is, or are you saying that you as the fact finder or the jury is to determine whether the defendants acted as a reasonable officer based on evidence provided in court as to what the reasonable officer standard is? Or another way of saying this is, as a lay fact finder, is a lay fact finder qualified to determine what the reasonable officer standard is? I'm confused based on what you said yesterday.
What was it I particularly said that was confusing?
I think you said that you believe that that you could determine the reasonable officer, what a reasonable officer standard is, and I'm not. That threw me for a loop because I don't think that's the case law, and that's why I'm just asking to understand what.
I don't think I actually said that in particular, did I? I don't recall
when you were
that.
giving your opinion, you were saying, I think I can determine what the reasonable officer standard is. That's what my understanding is. And I just wanted to get it clear on the record as to, is that your position as far as what the law is? Because I need to know that to be able to continue to go forward with presenting our case, Your Honor. At least I feel like I need to understand what you're saying. Are you qualified to determine what the reasonable officer standard is, or does there have to be evidence to determine what the reasonable officer standard is, and then you make the determination of whether or not they lived up to that standard? That's my question.
What I recall saying, and just as a side matter, was that the language of Mantilli, when I was talking about it was the actions of the police officer that we are looking at to determine whether or not they're reasonable.
Well,
and I said that because all the parties have been talking about a reasonable officer or reasonable officer, and I just wanted to make it clear that it's the acts themselves that we're looking at to determine if they're reasonable.
And I would suggest to you, Your Honor, I think that's what caused me the confusion, because Mantelli specifically says in the jury instruction that it crafted for this is that a belief by a reasonable officer based on the expertise and experience of the officers. So just the acts by themselves in a vacuum aren't what it's judged upon. It's whether or not based on what a reasonable officer with their experience and expertise would do. Expertise means no lay witness could know necessarily what that
that's true too, but I mean ultimately, and I'm not trying to split hairs with you on the law,
I'm
but
not either. I'm just trying to understand.
The jury instructions, and looking at the jury instructions, talk about the reasonable person and would the reasonable person in the same circumstances have acted in that particular fashion or manner. I mean, depending on which one you're looking at.
But Mantelli said the reasonable person doesn't qualify in this case when you're raising justified homicide. It's as a reasonable police officer based on his expertise and experience, correct?
And the instructions say a reasonable person in that person's position, that being a police officer.
Right, and so therefore a lay witness would, my understanding is that a lay witness can't do that without knowing what a reasonable police officer's standard is, correct? I mean, in other words, they have to have evidence. I guess it's no different from a doctor. You can't determine if a surgeon cut the wrong artery unless you hear another expert come in and say that's below the standard of care. The same thing here is what I'm saying, is that you can't determine whether or not an officer acted reasonable unless you hear what that reasonable standard is. Am I correct in assuming that, Your Honor?
Well, I'd like to hear from the other parties. If there's confusion about how to interpret Mantelli, I'd certainly listen to other people's opinions.
And I would, just for the record, so that I can make sure it's a clear record, Mantelli actually said that 5173 to be modified as follows, and it lists it out. And then in that part of that is that officer based on expertise and experience of the officer. And it goes on to say the burden's on the state. So I'm not asking you to switch your ruling or anything like that. I'm just saying my understanding of Mentelli, and that you can't just say, this is what I think the reasonable standard should be. You have to hear about experience and expertise of officers to understand what the reasonable standard is, and then decide whether or not those two officers lived up to those standards.
Reasonable standard or reasonable officer?
Reasonable officer, but that's a standard, what a reasonable officer would do. That's the point that I think you have to hear and have to have, because you can't do this in a vacuum. For example, they introduce all those training records, and you can't, by just looking at these training records, know what actually is in all those training records or what these officers or other similarly situated reasonable officers have been taught. In other words, you don't know all that expertise. So you have to have some kind of testimony to be able to base it, because Mentelli says expertise and experience. And that's really, I just need some clarification on that. Thank you.
Mr. Holmes?
Yes, Your Honor. The state's aware of no case, statute, or jury instruction that stands for the proposition that the only person who's allowed to judge a police officer's conduct is another police officer. There's no law out there that says that the jury is a representative of the conscience of the community, and this court is a representative of the law and the legal standard, is not qualified to judge whether the conduct of a police officer is reasonable. There's no case that says that the state has to provide an expert witness to delineate what the standard is, to delineate what a reasonable officer should have done under the circumstances. Instead, the state is allowed to present circumstantial evidence of what is expected and to demonstrate how the officer's conduct in any case, and in this case, violated that standard. Even if that were the law, that the state is required to prove what the standard is and what a reasonable officer should or was required to do under the circumstances, the state has essentially done that. We've introduced SOPs. We've elicited testimony from multiple witnesses that no officer is allowed to exercise deadly force on a person who is attempting to surrender. Yesterday, we proved that Mr. Boyd was shot while he was turning in an attempt to lay down. We proved that the most immediately fatal bullet was fired into his back as he was laying down. That means there's a question of whether these officers killed Mr. Boyd when he was attempting to surrender. Even if we had to establish what a reasonable officer standard was and to prove that the officers failed to meet that, we have done that in this case. But ultimately, the theme in this case, and the current through this case, is that these officers' conduct is subject to the law. The law is the court in this case, not the opinions of other police officers or experts on police conduct.
Well, again, I think if you all recall, at the very beginning of the hearing, I said that SOPs and training material would be allowable to help me form a basis for what a reasonable police officer is. And the defense did not want me to accept those SOPs. And I did because I thought they were training material to help guide me in that direction. So I don't understand why now this has come up, because I have let that evidence in to help make that determination.
Your Honor, the reason we did not want the SOPs to come in was just revealed by the state when they said, Your Honor, you've heard evidence that they didn't live up to the standard of to a reasonable officer standard, because we introduced these SOPs and they may have violated, someone else other than a defendant may have violated one of those SOPs. As I stated before, the case law could not be more clear when evaluating the reasonable officer standard, the objective reasonableness standard. It is not whether they followed an SOP. A violation of an SOP is by law not a violation of a reasonable officer standard. And that was my concern with introducing them in the first place, is that they're going to conflate the two. Of course they're going to try, but the court can't be persuaded by whether they followed an SOP is evidence of whether they were acting as an objectively reasonable officer. That is a different standard. It's a constitutional standard. Mantelli mandates that it's the Fourth Amendment constitutional reasonableness standard, which is not governed by SOPs, and for very good reason. So we are not saying that a civilian is not qualified to judge whether an officer acted reasonably. Not at all. What we're saying is that there is an objective standard. There will be testimony on what training these officers received, and the court is perfectly well qualified to judge whether they lived up to that standard. That's the decision that's being made. Did they act objectively reasonably given this standard?
And if I could just finally say something. Okay, thank you. I am not suggesting for 1 minute that citizens or yourself cannot judge a police officer. But what I am suggesting is you can't do it in a vacuum. Mantelli demands that you do it based on expertise, is their word. Expertise and experience. So in order to understand what expertise and experience of a police officer is, you have to be able to understand what officers would do in certain situations. And you just can't, as a layperson, I don't believe you can just say, I think they should have done this. You have to base it on testimony and evidence in this courtroom given to you as to what I'm not going to hear an expert witness testify as to the fact of, well, an officer. Level that requires expertise and experience. I would suggest to you that is no different in a medical malpractice case, a legal malpractice case, or an accounting malpractice case, for example. You have to have someone come in and tell you what that standard of care is, for example, in those cases, because you wouldn't know whether or not they cut the wrong artery in a surgery or not. You would have to know whether or not they fell below that standard of care in a medical. And what do? You ask a doctor in those situations to come in and testify as to whether or not they fell below the standard of care. That's exactly what we do in cases all the time. You are the one that makes the ultimate decision as a fact finder. I completely agree with that, Your Honor. But you can't do it without that kind of expert testimony. It's done all the time in cases that give you a level, a bar, that you can't fall below as a police officer. It's done when it's a doctor. We wouldn't know whether or not the doctor cut the wrong artery, so we asked the doctor to come in and testify. We wouldn't know whether or not an accountant committed malpractice, so we asked an expert accountant to come in and say, this is the standard of care. It's the same thing here. We ask a police officer to come in and testify to what the standard is of an objectively reasonable officer. That you still make that ultimate decision, but because there is a standard, and Mantelli says there's this standard, we have to be able to give you something from which to determine that. And that the only way to do that, when they use the words expertise and experience, is to provide you with expert expertise and experience from officers about what that reasonably objective standard is.
Okay, so what are you asking for in the way of a remedy? Are you asking me to reconsider my decision from yesterday?
Not
I'm not
necessarily.
sure.
No, what I was trying to understand is where you were, because I think if I understand what you're saying, if I understand what your opinion is on this, or what your analysis of the law is, it makes it clear for what we are going to be able to get into evidence here, and it dictates what kind of evidence we provide to you. If you're saying, I'm not going to hear an expert witness testify as to the fact of, well, an officer is trained to do this, and in this situation, an officer, a reasonably objective officer, would do this. You're saying we can't do that because, what I'm hearing is you're saying we can't do that because that's the ultimate question. But how else are you going to hear it if you don't let us give you testimony on what a reasonable officer should be able and allowed to do in a particular situation if we don't give you testimony to it? And that's the thing. You're saying it's the ultimate question, but no, it's identifying and defining what the objectively reasonable officer is. That's what we're trying to get across to you. Because you've basically, I think, already have ruled or told us that you're not allowed someone to give an ultimate opinion. I'm not asking for the ultimate opinion, but I think for you to be able to judge what is reasonably objectable or objectively reasonable from a police officer, you should at least allow an officer who's highly trained to tell you this is what we do in situations like this. If someone is not, and I don't want to go into the facts specific of this, but you should be able to at least hear that. Otherwise, how do you know? How do you know whether or not they followed what their training is and expertise if you don't let someone else come in and take the stand and say they're trained this way, and when this happens, this is what they're supposed to do? They keep saying it's the ultimate question, but all I'm saying is this is what they're supposed to do.
Mr. Bregman, I thought at the very beginning I said the officers would be able to testify as to what they did at the scene and how they felt and what they perceived the scene to be.
But you also said that you would not let testimony come in from an officer who says, we've been trained that if you perceive a threat from 9 feet away with a deadly weapon, that we can't elicit the testimony that you would shoot them.
I never said that. What I said was the officers cannot testify to the fact that in their opinion that the defendants acted as a result of feeling they were being threatened and acted in self-defense, or that they had probable cause to fire their weapons, things of that nature.
But so what I'm understanding is you will let them testify to the idea that based on our training, if someone takes an aggressive stance, if we perceive a deadly threat 9 feet away with someone with 2 knives on a fellow officer, we are trained to shoot that person.
I've never said that wasn't coming in. I don't know where you came up with that.
I'm sorry that I misunderstood you, and I'm so glad we did this clarification. That's
all right, sir.
Thank you.
Another preliminary matter, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
May I approach the bench?
Sure.
I have 2 proposed orders denying in part and granting in part the defendant's motions for directed verdict, which is essentially what we call them, related to the dismissal of the involuntary manslaughter charges. They've been signed by both parties, one for Keith Sandy and one for Lieutenant Dominic Lopez, Your Honor.
And has the defense seen them?
They have, and they've signed them, Your Honor.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Bregman, do you have questions for this witness?
I don't. Thank you.
All right, sir. State?
Yes, Judge, if I can set up the computers for a second here. sound?
Yes.
Sure, where do I, right here? Can I plug it in now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll wait. Thanks, Scott. Thank you very much. Thank you, Judge. Good morning, Mr. Thixton.
Morning.
Mr. Boyd had been camping in the foothills for about 30 days.
Yes.
He was camping there with a young African-American man,
Yes.
and during that time, he had not had any direct contact with you or your wife, had he?
Not directly, no.
And he hadn't, to your knowledge, accosted any hikers, had he?
Not to my knowledge.
And hadn't hurt any children on the mountain during that 30 days, had he, sir?
I wouldn't be aware.
Right. You're unaware of him hurting anybody on the mountain, aren't you, sir, before he got shot on March 16th?
Correct, except for the verbal threats I heard that one.
Oh, yeah, and I want to ask you about that, because they actually interviewed you, the police did, at about 11:30 the night of this event, and you knew they were trying to get all the facts that you knew at the time to help in their investigation. Is that right?
Yes.
And you spoke with them voluntarily, didn't you?
Yes.
And at that time, you talked about this incident back in February when you heard some yelling with Mr. Boyd and this young African-American man. Is that right?
Correct.
And at that time, you never mentioned to the police officers that he had made any threats. Instead, what you stated was that James was yelling at the other subject about how his life was ruined and the government had a $500 billion bailout. Isn't that what you told the police that night, sir?
It's hard to say because that was a year and a half ago, but yes, sure, if that's what was recorded.
And you told the police that night that you decided to call the police but elected not to contact the police that night. Is that right?
Correct, because I gave the operator on the phone details of how to reach the site.
You never mentioned to the officers the night that they interviewed you that Mr. Boyd had made any threats to anybody, did you, sir?
I didn't mention it to the officers
All right.
specifically.
Even though you knew this statement was important for your investigation, is that right?
I didn't realize it would become this important at this time, or at that time.
You had been taking pictures of Mr. Boyd before March 16th, hadn't you?
There was one occasion, I believe, yes.
On March 1st, you took pictures of him?
Correct.
And then on March 16th, you took your 2 Great Danes and a pistol and went up to check out the campsite after Mr. Boyd and the other man had left?
Yes.
And
When I was certain Mr. Boyd was not there.
Right. You didn't find any evidence of any illegal activity up there, did you?
So at that time, because I'd heard the yelling at the mountains and because the police responded by just driving down Piedra Vista, I went up to see if there was anything obvious up there that I thought would be relevant, because I wasn't certain if the second time if I called, if they were going to go up to the site or not.
Do you remember my question?
So you asked if I had seen anything illegal laying out?
Yes, sir.
Correct. I didn't go through his contents. I just looked at book bags and his tarp. I didn't see anything illegal in the open.
All right. You didn't see any guns there?
No.
Didn't see any drugs?
No.
Didn't see any alcohol?
I don't think so.
Didn't see any, he had some jugs of water that he carried up there, didn't he? Did you see those?
I did see that. Those were out.
All right. And he didn't have any stolen property that you could identify up there, is that right?
Nothing that was out in the open.
Okay. And you're aware...
Again, he
I'm
had
sorry.
all of his belongings in book bags or under a tarp.
You were aware that the police collected everything that he owned in the world that was up there.
Objection,
aren't you, sir?
consent calls for speculation.
We'll join your honor.
After the shooting, all of that stuff was gone from there. Is that right?
There was another occasion, so the
And
next...
I'm talking about March 16th. After
Correct.
the shooting, did the police remove all of the items that had been up there?
No, there were still some items back there that I discovered later.
All right. You are aware that of all the things that the police found, they found no drugs up there?
Objection calls for speculation.
We'll join your honor.
No one has told you that they found any evidence of illegal activity in Mr. Boyd's belongings, have they, sir?
Objection calls for hearsay.
We'll join, Your Honor.
Sustained, Counsel.
Your suspicions have never been confirmed by the police that he was,
Objection, relevance.
I'll allow that question.
My suspicions,
your suspicions that he had guns or drugs or alcohol or stolen property have never been confirmed by the police, has it, sir?
I wouldn't say that I was assuming that he had these things, but I thought it would be warranted information. I thought it would be important information for the police. It was also the basis of my decision of whether to call 911 or the police non-emergency line. If I had found something, I probably would have called 911 that would have warranted an emergency.
Okay, you're going right where I want to go, because let's talk about what you didn't do. You did not call the City of Albuquerque non-emergency number 311 to try to get them to send someone up to provide services for Mr. Boyd, did you?
The homeless helpline?
Yes, sir.
No, because prior he was abusive. I feared for my safety, so I did not want to just call 311 to donate something to him. When he was yelling at that man, it was aggressive. He was saying things. I don't want that around my family. I don't want that around my house.
Yes, sir. That contact all happened back in February, is that right?
Correct.
The yelling that you told the police was simply him saying about how his life was ruined and the government had a $500 billion bailout. That's what you told the police that night about what he had said. Isn't that right, sir?
That's what I told the police, yes.
All
And
right.
that's odd behavior.
And did that indicate to you that he might be mentally ill?
Yes.
And so did you call the Good Samaritan Shelter or somebody who deals regularly with the mentally ill?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Overruled. I'll allow him to answer the question.
I don't even know that these services exist. My belief would be that you call either the APD or you call the police non-emergency hotline, and they would point them towards those sources. I don't have extensive knowledge of all the individual resources that are available to someone who is mentally ill. I'm a neighbor. I don't know of these resources out there.
In any event, sir, you didn't open the phone book or get on line and try to find any of those services for Mr. Boyd, did you, sir?
No.
Objection, asked and answered.
Sustained.
Instead, you called the Albuquerque Police Department non-emergency number, is that right?
Correct.
The first officers who arrived were the open spaces officers.
Correct.
When they arrived, did you still have your pistol?
Yes.
Where was it?
It was in my pocket.
And did you have other firearms there at your house?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Sustained as to that.
All right. Do you own pocket knives or service knives, sir?
Objection,
Relevance,
relevance.
Your Honor.
Oh, I think it is relevant, Judge, about how they dealt with him differently than Mr. Boyd.
I'll sustain the objection.
The two police officers never asked you about weapons in your house, did they, sir?
No, I was not the one. I was not the reason they were there. It was because of the man who was camping out in that area behind my house.
Yes, sir. My question was just the two police officers never asked you about weapons, did they, sir?
Objection, asked and answered.
That has been asked. Sustained.
Okay. And you never told them that you were carrying a weapon, a firearm, did you, sir?
I'm not aware of any law that you have to disclose that information that you're concealing as soon as an officer makes contact with you.
Yes, sir. You never told the police officers you were carrying a weapon, did you, sir?
Not at that time, not until they asked.
And they never patted you down, did they?
No,
And they never pulled their guns on you, did they, sir?
no, I was the one who made the call, and they had to talk to me first over the person who was out there. I mean, when someone calls for help, do you go and you search that person who made that call for help?
Sir, they never pulled their guns on you, did they?
Objection, asked and answered.
Well, sir, he's not answering the question, Judge. He's answering things he wants to answer rather than yes or no.
He actually did answer.
He actually answered the question. I'll sustain the objection, but I am going to caution the witness to please just answer the question.
Certainly.
All right. And we talked about this video. After you made this call, you went up on your balcony and you set up 2 cameras. Is that my understanding?
I set up one at a time. I had one camera that had a battery that lasted about 20 minutes or so. And so when I had to charge that battery, I'd have to pull out my cell phone camera.
And you said that you recorded the things that you found interesting,
I would say I recorded the highlights, yes.
and that would be when Mr. Boyd was making noise or screaming, or the police officers were coming up, that's the kind of thing that you found interesting?
So when new police officers came through, I filmed that. When Mr. Boyd was yelling at the police officers, so during the altercation, the 3-hour altercation, there was a lot of stand down time.
And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because the thing you didn't film was the stand down time when Mr. Boyd was not yelling, right?
There are some instances where I didn't record the stand down time, Nick.
When there wasn't any action going on, you didn't film it, is that right?
Not always.
All right, and luckily, we captured some of your video did capture some of the times when Mr. Boyd was there. A couple times Mr. Boyd was actually crossing himself when he was up there, isn't that right, sir?
Crossing himself?
Yes, sir. Can I play the video for you? From your video, sir. See if it'll pop up. Do we need to turn something on, Joshua?
Podium from the judge.
Podium from you, Judge?
Is it VGA, HDMI?
HDMI, Your Honor.
Okay.
There you go. You recognize this as being from your video, isn't that right, sir?
Yes, I don't recognize the title.
Right. See there, he's crossing himself? And then let me do another one. Have I messed it up, Joshua?
Close to 50.
Yep. Okay, there you go. Here's the second one, sir. Different time. You see him cross himself again there,
Yes.
sir? All right. And let me do one more. And then you also filmed when things changed, when the tactical team arrived and the field officers were asked to stand down. And I'd like to go through that with you, sir, and talk about what Mr. Boyd was doing when that happened. Again, you recognize this as your video. That's the front of your house after the call that you made, is that right?
Yes.
And then here is where Officer Sandy arrives. And one of the things he and that SWAT officer did right away was point at Mr. Boyd. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's down by your house at the bottom of the hill there, is that right?
Yes.
And there's Mr. Boyd up there with the field officers. And then
Objection, Your Honor. I think Mr. Thixton's in a position to describe what he's saying without Ms. McGinn narrating what's happening.
Your Honor, I get to lead. This is cross-examination.
Well, I am waiting for a question, so.
Yes, sir. And sir, there is Mr. Boyd looking out to see who's arriving. Is that right? Is that what you're filming there, Mr. Thixton?
Actually, when I saw him looking like that, I thought he
It calls
was...
for speculation, Your Honor. This is him looking to see who's arriving.
I'll withdraw the question, Judge.
All right.
And as they were switching out people, what did Mr. Boyd do, Mr. Thixton, if you can tell me?
So here it looks like he's walking towards them and he's taking a seat.
And he stayed seated for some time, did he not, sir, while the field officers left and the other officers, the TAC officers replaced them. Is that right?
It's honestly hard for me to recall.
Here's the TAC officers going up to the scene. That's Officer Sandy, as you know, right here, pointing his gun again up the hill.
Objection to the form of the question, if there is one, Your Honor.
Would you please ask the question?
Is that Officer Sandy pointing his gun at Mr. Boyd, who's just still sitting on the rock, sir?
I cannot tell because he's facing away.
Okay. Your Honor, that's all the evidence that we have, and I'll pass the witness.
Okay, any redirect?
No No questions, Your Honor.
May this witness be excused from the case?
I don't have any.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
State, may he be excused?
Yes, Your Honor, you may.
All right, thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Call your next witness.
Your Honor, defendants call Ronald McCarthy, who's being... I apologize. Defendants call Ronald McCarthy, and he's being brought forward.
All right.
Would you raise your right hand for me, please?
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm, under the penalty of law, that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, sir.
Please be seated.
Thank you.
May it please the Court?
Go right ahead.
Mr. McCarthy, would you please state your full name?
My name is Ronald Michael McCarthy, McCarthy.
Now, it's your understanding that you are here to provide expert witness testimony regarding police procedures and other related questions about police practices?
Yes, sir.
Now, before we actually get to your opinions, what I'd like to do is to provide the Court with some information about your background. First, I'd like to have you identify who was the first law enforcement agency for whom you worked.
The Los Angeles Police Department in Los Angeles, California.
When did you begin your career with the Los Angeles Police Department?
In August 1st, 1960.
And how many years did you work as a Los Angeles Police Department officer?
A little over 24 years, sir.
Now, how many of those years as a, and again, the acronym is correct, LAPD officer.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so again, instead of saying Los Angeles Police Department officer, I'm just going to use that simple acronym. How many years did you work as a patrol officer for the Los Angeles Police Department?
I worked in patrol for approximately 4 years and then went to vice and then back to patrol.
Okay. Now, there came a time when you became a member of the LAPD SWAT team, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Would you please tell us when that happened?
That happened in 1971. First I was a member of Metropolitan Division, where you have to be before you can be selected to the SWAT team. And I was there in 1965, February of 65. And then when Special Weapons and Tactics started and was put into Metro, I was assigned to SWAT.
Now, again, you were a SWAT team member in the 70s. Because of your experience moving forward, in what ways did the work as a SWAT team officer in the 1970s differ than the SWAT team work you would find someone today?
It differed in that originally the concept, because of the civil unrest that was taking place in the 60s and 70s, originally the program was established to provide high ground protection for deployed police officers, because there were organizations, whether underground, Prairie Fire, the Black Panther Party, Brown Berets, that had established very structured methodology to confront the police, to attack the police, to murder the police. So therefore, we were behind, meaning law enforcement was behind. We recognized that we had to have different tactics and techniques, and so originally it was high ground protection for deployed officers who were on the ground, and that was essentially all that originally it did, and that lasted for about 2 or 3 years. And then when it came time to confront the militant organizations and arrest them for warrants for murder, etc., possession of explosives, the SWAT team became engaged in doing that kind of work.
Now, let me stop you there.
I'm sorry.
Based on the answer you've given, would it be fair to say that you were involved in the initial development of the concept of SWAT where it first developed, and that is in Southern California?
Objection, leading.
I think it's a little foundational. I'll allow him to ask the question. Go ahead.
Yes, sir, I was one of those that was given that responsibility.
Now, how many years did you work as an LAPD officer, as an LAPD SWAT officer?
13 years.
During those 13 years, would you give us a general description of the types of calls for service that you as a SWAT officer would attend to?
The most often that we were given a call was for barricaded individuals for different problems that they had, either wanted suspects or individuals who were acting out after committing a very serious crime, or emotionally disturbed people. At that time, suicide by cop wasn't recognized as suicide by cop, but we responded to that and then began to recognize that that kind of thing existed.
Now,
the second thing became warrant services.
Okay. During those 13 years you served in the LA Police Department SWAT team, how much experience did you have dealing with individuals who are emotionally disturbed, suicidal?
A considerable amount, but you get that in patrol, working patrol too, because you're given assignments as a patrol officer to calls. We use plain language, not code, and they would say unknown trouble, or say an emotionally disturbed male, emotionally disturbed female, emotionally disturbed juvenile, and those calls were common. Sometimes it was driven by drugs, and often it was driven by manic depression or paranoid schizophrenics.
Now, I noticed you used the words emotionally disturbed as opposed to a person suffering from mental illness. Why do you choose to use the words emotionally disturbed as opposed to identifying someone with a mental illness?
I would suggest that it's probably the same thing, but I don't consider myself a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't have that skill and background, and so the emotionally disturbed person, or EDP, that covers a lot of bases, including people who don't have a mental illness, but they're acting out outrageously.
Okay. Now, there came a time when you were promoted to sergeant with the Los Angeles Police Department. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, when were you first promoted to sergeant?
1967.
What units did you serve as? I apologize. It was a poorly asked question. In what units did you supervise as a sergeant?
At first, in my job and task in Metro Division, I was promoted in Metro Division, and they kept me. And I was in what was termed C Platoon, which was an emergency response to civil unrest, handling VIP details, presidential candidates to the president who visits, and we assist Secret Service. When SWAT started then in Metro, then I was moved to SWAT.
And then for how many years did you serve as a supervisor over the LAPD SWAT team?
I was a senior supervisor for my last 9 years. Okay. I served as a supervisor the entire time.
What did you do as a SWAT team supervisor with the LAPD?
My job was, first of all, to train my officers. I was the primary trainer for the SWAT team. After being in the SWAT team for 3 years, I became the primary trainer and did that responsibility. I trained the supervisors as they came and went, and my job was to respond with the SWAT team and act as the tactical commander for that kind of incident that we were present at, assigned to, and my responsibility was to an incident commander who may have been a captain, a commander, or a deputy chief.
Now, with regard to your role as a sergeant or a supervisor, what was your responsibility in terms of reviewing use of force incidents?
I'm sorry, would you?
When you were a supervisor, what was your role in reviewing the use of force incidents of your subordinates?
My role was to do exactly that, to review what has happened as a way of learning and learning from our mistakes, because we made them. It's impossible to do police work without having everything go perfectly. And so therefore, you would recognize something that you have done, and that's an ongoing situation. In today's world, dynamic entry isn't utilized nearly as much as it was 15 or 20 years ago, and that's a good thing because it was overdone, overutilized.
So in your role as a SWAT team supervisor, you look critically at use of force incidents throughout the 9 years you were a supervisor to determine how things should have gone and how to do them better in the future. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it is.
Now, with regard to your experience as a SWAT team supervisor, how frequently did you deal with situations in which there was an armed individuals who might be emotionally disturbed or suicidal?
Well, we would average about 60 to 80 call-outs a year, actual call-outs, and I would say that about 20% of those would fall into the category of emotionally disturbed people.
Now, I overlooked asking you these questions about the role of a patrol officer. Based on your experience as a patrol officer, with what frequency does a patrol officer handle situations that involve someone who's emotionally disturbed, suicidal, and try to resolve them?
Quite often. And the best example of that is domestic violence, a domestic disturbance. And those are very emotional situations. Although the person may not be suffering from mental illness, they have become very outrageous in their actions to the point that they hit their wife. Usually the man is the problem. So that person, for that moment in time, is emotionally disturbed. And it's an effort on the part of the police to try to appropriately respond to that and stop the violence and calm the person down and arrest them for what they did wrong.
So it's fair to say that an officer gains experience by dealing not just simply with people who are later identified as mentally ill, but in dealing with anyone who is suffering a crisis in their life.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Counsel?
Objection leading, Your Honor.
You can rephrase the question, please.
What is your view on the statement that an officer gains experience dealing with people who are emotionally disturbed by dealing with anyone who's in crisis?
My perspective is based on my personal experience and obviously observation over the years. Going and knocking on a door to tell a mother and father that their 16-year-old daughter was killed in a traffic accident on the way to the prom is an example of how do you deal with somebody who is going to be extremely upset, heartbroken. Dealing with a 12-year-old boy who is the victim of somebody who has sodomized him. That takes a skill set, and the officer has to understand the kind of devastation that has been delivered to a 12-year-old kid and the difficulty that kid has in handling it and then talking about it so that the officer can hold whoever's accountable for that and make the arrest. So there's a lot of examples of people who are emotionally disturbed and really upside down emotionally, and they're not crazy. They're not suffering from a multitude of different circumstances. They're upset, and the officer has to know the difference and how to deal with that. I've never interviewed a woman who was the victim of rape who was not emotionally disturbed about that. And you have to, and they all are different, and you have to be able to do that.
Now, there came a time when you retired from the Los Angeles Police Department,
Yes,
and you retired having served 20 years with the Los Angeles Police Department.
24.
24, I apologize for that. And then there came a time when you moved to the city of Albuquerque, is that right?
Yes, sir.
How many years did you live here?
2.
Now, would you please tell us about the work you did while residing in the city of Albuquerque?
I was the Chief of Tactical Operations for the Department of Energy on Kirtland Air Force Base at the Department of Energy facility, and my responsibility was train Department of Energy personnel and military personnel in protecting nuclear assets, nuclear weapons, also to develop scenarios and put on scenarios utilizing special operations personnel from the military to test different nuclear sites for their ability to recognize and repel a terrorist event trying to obtain nuclear weapons or nuclear material, and to do site evaluations of the different locations around the country that were nuclear weapon sites and give my input back as to whether their security was adequate or not.
Now, if I remember correctly, was the location where you were working and the name of the facility the Central Training Academy?
That's correct.
What training did the Central Training Academy give to domestic law enforcement officers, that is, Albuquerque Police Department, State Police, and other local agencies?
We trained SWAT teams from different places in New Mexico and Albuquerque Police Department. We did train their original SWAT team.
Okay. So how much interaction did you have with Albuquerque Police Department officers while you were at the Director of Training for the Central Training Academy?
Quite a bit. I would say a significant amount, because some of their other officers would come for other specific officer survival training is what we termed it. And so we had quite a bit of interaction with Albuquerque PD at the time.
What specific training did the Central Training Academy provide that you were involved in terms of teaching, instructing, training domestic or local law enforcement officers?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
I apologize if that was a bit confusing. What training did you and the CTA provide to local law enforcement officers?
We provided everything from basic police tactics and techniques all the way through critical incident management, hostage negotiations. We had a component and a training cadre for hostage negotiations, so virtually all of it was provided to Albuquerque PD anytime they wanted it, and it was done at no charge. I'll mention that so it helped the taxpayers, and
Okay.
I was one of those for 2 years since I lived here.
Now, just so that the court understands, the CTA is located in the foothills. Is that right, of the Manzano Mountains?
Yes, sir, it is.
And is it fair to say that you were in and around the foothills area for years, 2 years at least?
Oh, yes, and I lived in the foothills. So.
Okay. So in reviewing the incident involving James Boyd, how familiar are you with the terrain that the officers were facing in the James Boyd incident?
I certainly recognize it, and I certainly utilized it myself, because it's a beautiful place to go, and So I think I'm conversant with it. I wouldn't call myself an expert on dealing with all of those kinds of things that maybe a game warden would or something like that.
Okay. Now, one of the things you had mentioned is that the Central Training Academy provides training to special operation groups. That is the military's most elite forces. How do you reconcile the fact that you're providing training for those groups with the fact that you're also training domestic law enforcement?
There's a major difference between law enforcement and the military. And law enforcement approaches techniques and tactics and problems and situations in a much different way than certainly a SEAL Team 6, or Delta Force would approach it. And the military and the police are vastly different. But there are similarities. Certainly a hostage rescue effort is done the same whether it's done by law enforcement or whether it's done by a military organization. If the hostage rescue has gone tactical and negotiations has failed, then there's really no real separation in the tactics and techniques. But there are differences. There are similarities. Some of the police weapons are similar to military weapons.
Now, with regard to your duties in that position, would it be fair to say that there was a clear distinction and delineation between the training you gave the military personnel and the training you gave local law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, after your 2 years working in the training at the CTA, or the Central Training Academy, you then took a new position, I believe in Washington, D.C., is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, what did you, all right, first I want to ask about these particular groups. What is the IACP?
It's an acronym for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is an organization, national, international organization of chiefs of police that provide chiefs of police worldwide with model policies, a lot of training and operational and management concepts, things over the years that change. The IACP that's their role, and they're located in Washington, D.C.
Now,
area.
Again, the DOJ is the Department of Justice.
That's correct.
Now, is it correct to say that beginning in 1996, you were the project coordinator for the Deadly Force Training Program sponsored by and supported by the IACP and the DOJ?
Judge Leading.
I'll allow his foundational overrule.
Yes, sir, I was.
What did you do as the project coordinator for the Deadly Force Training Program?
My first responsibility was to gather together a colloquy, if you will, of different people that had expertise I didn't. Lawyers, doctors, and then I also gathered together state and federal police personnel of different ranks that I had belief in that could help develop a training program for our chiefs of police in the United States to train the chiefs of police on deadly force issues. And so we did that. It was renewed, and then we trained middle managers. It was renewed, and then we trained first-line supervisors all the way to chiefs of police or commissioners.
What was this training program you developed, without getting into all the details? What exactly was the goal of that program?
The goal of the program was to acquaint people. Use of force, deadly force, is not utilized a lot in law enforcement, contrary to what some people believe. Use of force and deadly force is very seldom utilized. But when it is utilized, it has to be utilized appropriately, and then the management of a department has to be able to recognize whether that force was utilized appropriately or not, and then if it wasn't, to identify why and fix the problem, and then also to handle the responsibility of taking that use of force or deadly force situation and presenting it to the public in an honest and forthright way that the public has an opportunity to understand. And there's a variety of different problems in doing that, involving how we get the information to our citizens that we serve. And does the media play a role in that? Yes. And then how do you interact with the media? And that was all part of the training that we put together.
Now, would you please describe what that training meant for the first responder or tactical officer? What kind of guidance did your project provide that person?
It provided them with a series of steps you take when you can. A series of steps you take in response to what appears to be a chaotic or violent incident or a deadly force threat. And an evaluation has to be done by the officer, and that may happen in split seconds. If somebody's exiting the bank with a ski mask and a bag of money in one hand and a gun in the other, that's one problem. And then there may be a circumstance where it isn't that clearly defined as to what is taking place, and the officer has to try to measure their response consistent with what's appearing before them. And that can be a very fragile and it's sometimes very difficult circumstance. So we try to teach them how to do that, and where you can apply the steps, we put those steps before them and try to train them how to utilize them.
Now, when did you leave your position as the project coordinator for the Deadly Force Training Program of the IACP and the DOJ?
In 1993, we were having grandkids one after the other, and my wife said she was moving if I wasn't. So we moved back to California.
Now, upon your return, or I should say, there came a point in time, I believe in 1988, when you became the manager of the Center for Advanced Police Studies. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Well, what is the Center for Advanced Police Studies?
That's IACP's training program, and the training runs the gamut from every part of police work, from writing traffic tickets to being a chief of police. There are training programs that are built inside the Center for Advanced Police Studies, and I manage those training programs, selected the instructors, taught in the ones that I had knowledge to teach, and reached out to experts across the country to teach those things that I had no ability to teach.
What subjects did you have the training and expertise upon which to teach?
First of all, use of force and patrol officers and their world in responding to situations that may involve use of force. Then it ran the gamut from special weapons and tactics, VIP security, hostage negotiations, and I would teach in a component part of that, or I would teach all of it. And if I was teaching narcotics investigation or sex crimes, that's something I can't teach. I would have somebody that had expertise to come in and teach those things.
Now, you've mentioned the term hostage negotiations a few times, I believe, and would you please explain what hostage negotiations is and what it actually takes to do that kind of job?
Yes, sir. The New York Police Department was the first agency to develop, and Dr. Harvey Schlossberg, a psychologist, put the program together for the New York Police Department. And we sent one of our members back to NYPD to learn it, and then they came back and taught us because it was obviously the future and the present. So what it was essentially was to make contact, try to recognize the kind of person that you're trying to talk to, develop a strategy to try to be successful, utilize a verbal strategy, and try to resolve the incident without violence, or use negotiations as a tactical asset. And while you're establishing a tactical response, and when it's appropriate, exercise the tactical response. For example, a hostage incident that is famous, Iranian embassy siege by 22nd SAS in London, England. There was a lot of negotiations went on over several days. And then they utilized those negotiations as a diversion so that they could use 22nd SAS to tactically intrude into the structure, using the negotiations as a diversion, and rescue the hostages and neutralize the hostage takers.
Now, you mentioned the word diversion, and you would agree. What is your view on the need for a negotiator to always tell the truth? What has your training and experience taught you about that concept?
Objection, relevance, and although he hasn't been tendered as an expert yet, I think it's outside the scope of his expertise.
Well, let me deal with the relevance objection first of all. I'm going to overrule the relevance objection now. I need to ask you, Counselor, are you offering him as an expert, and if so, in what area?
There's actually quite a bit more training and experience to go before I was going to tender him, but I was going to tender this particular witness on, make sure the tender is just right, police procedures, SWAT team procedures, less lethal and deadly force, encompassed in the use of force, and police and SWAT team training, including the use of negotiations in tactical situations.
My concern, Your Honor, and I think we'll see this bear out, the defense has two witnesses we expect to deal with today. One who's an expert on police training and practices, and another who purports to be an expert on how human beings think, act, react, things to that effect. If Mr. McCarthy is here to talk about how police officers are trained and what they do based on that training, he should not be explaining to us why police officers are trained that way. That is, the underlying fundamentals of how humans behave, how humans perceive things, how humans react. That's outside the scope of his expertise. As he acknowledged, I don't consider myself a psychologist, Your Honor.
The question I asked wasn't about assessing someone who suffers from mental illness. My question is, based on his training and experience, what is his view in terms of always being truthful during the course of negotiations? A very different, it's not a state of mind of anyone or analyzing the mentally ill. Again, this is a red herring more than anything else.
You know, Counsel, I think after the conversations we had this morning, what I'd like to do is meet with counsel and clients on the record in the jury room. I think we need to go through those orders that I initially laid out. I don't think we ever got a final written one, but I'd like to discuss that. And so we're all on the same page of what evidence is coming in and what evidence isn't. And I think that would assist all of us. And so let's recess. I'd like for all of you to come back into the jury room so we can talk about this a little further, okay?
Yes, sir.
Be at recess.
All rise.